The Amazon River, the most powerful river system on Earth. Over 4,000 miles of dark water, cutting through the densest jungle on the planet. A place where nature still holds dominion, where civilization ends and something older, something primal, begins. But there's one place in the Amazon that even the local tribes avoid, where the black waters of the Rio Negro meet the muddy brown of the Solomons. A confluence of rivers that creates a natural border between two worlds. The locals call it the meeting of waters, and they say if you go there at night, when the moon is full, you'll hear something. Not the sounds of the jungle, not the calls of animals or the rustle of wind through the trees. You'll hear singing, a voice so beautiful, so impossibly perfect, that it pulls at something deep inside you, something you didn't even know was there. And if you're a man, if you follow that voice into the water, you will never be seen again. They call her Iara, the Lady of the Waters, the Mother of the River. Most people think she's just a myth, a Brazilian version of a mermaid, a cautionary tale to keep children away from dangerous waters. But what if I told you that Iara was real, that she was once a human woman, a warrior, the greatest fighter her people had ever known, and that her transformation into something else, something vengeful and eternal, began with a murder? To understand what happened to Iara, we first need to understand who she was. And she was not what you'd expect. Iara was born into a Tupi-Guarani tribe, somewhere along the banks of the Rio Negro, in what we now call the Brazilian Amazon. This was long before European colonizers arrived, long before the jungle had cities cut into it. This was a time when the indigenous peoples of the Amazon lived in harmony with the forest, but also in constant awareness of its dangers. Life in the pre-colonial Amazon was not easy. The jungle provided everything, yes, but it also demanded everything. Food had to be hunted, territory had to be defended, and survival required strength, skill, and courage. Iara had all three. Her father was the tribe's Paja, their spiritual leader and shaman, a man who communed with the spirits of the forest, who healed the sick, who guided his people through the unseen world. It was a position of immense respect and power, but Iara did not follow in her father's mystical footsteps. Instead, she became something else entirely, something unprecedented. She became a warrior. Now, understand that in many Tupi-Guarani tribes, women could be fighters, but to be the best, to surpass every man in combat, that was rare. That was revolutionary, and Iara was the best. From a young age, she showed an aptitude for warfare that stunned everyone. She could move through the jungle without making a sound. She could track prey, animal or human, over terrain that would lose anyone else. With a bow, she never missed. With a spear, she was deadly. But it was in close combat that Iara truly excelled. The tribes of the Amazon used a form of martial art that combined wrestling, striking, and ground fighting. It was brutal, efficient, designed for life or death situations, and Iara mastered it completely. By the time she reached her 20s, Iara had become a legend within her tribe and beyond. Other tribes knew her name. They knew that to attack her people meant facing her, and facing Iara meant death. She led hunting parties that brought back more game than anyone else. She led war parties that defended the tribe's territory with ruthless efficiency. Men twice her size feared her. Warriors from rival tribes requested to train with her, to learn from her. She was not just a fighter. She was an icon, a symbol of what was possible. The people loved her. They sang songs about her exploits. Children played games pretending to be her. Young women looked up to her as proof that they could be more than what tradition dictated. Iara was a hero, but there was one group who did not love her. One group who watched her rise with growing resentment, with poison in their hearts. Her brothers. Iara had brothers. The exact number varies depending on which version of the legend you hear. Some say 2, others say 3 or more, but the number doesn't matter. What matters is what they felt. Envy. Pure, corrosive, soul-destroying envy. See, in the social structure of the tribe, Iara's brothers should have been important. They were the sons of the Paja. They should have been leaders, warriors, men of status and respect. But they were not. They were good fighters, yes, competent hunters. But compared to their sister, they were nothing, and everyone knew it. Imagine being constantly compared to someone, every day, hearing how incredible your sister is, how brave, how skilled, how irreplaceable, while you're just adequate, just acceptable, just there. It would eat at you, and it ate at them. The brothers tried to match Iara. They trained harder. They pushed themselves, but no matter what they did, she was always better. It wasn't even close. When they brought back a deer from a hunt, Iara brought back a jaguar. When they defended against a raid, killing the enemies, Iara killed 5. When they learned a new fighting technique, Iara had already mastered it and moved on to something more advanced. The tribe's praise for Iara felt like mockery to her brothers. Every song sung about her victories was a reminder of their inadequacy. Every young warrior who asked to train with her was a rejection of them. The worst part, Iara never flaunted her superiority. She never looked down on her brothers. She loved them. She tried to include them, to train with them, to share her knowledge. But that made it worse. Her kindness felt like pity. Her attempts to help felt like condescension. Because how can you accept help from someone when the very fact that they can help you proves you're inferior? The psychology of envy is fascinating and terrifying. Envy isn't just wanting what someone else has. It's resenting them for having it. It's wanting to destroy what they have so that the gap between you closes. Even if closing that gap means pulling them down rather than building yourself up. And that's exactly what Iara's brothers felt. They didn't want to be as good as her. They wanted her to stop being so good. They wanted her light to go out so that theirs could shine. The tribal elders noticed the tension. The Paja, their father, certainly noticed. He tried to mediate, to remind his sons that Iara's greatness elevated the entire family, the entire tribe. But his words fell on deaf ears, because the brothers had made a decision, a terrible, irreversible decision. If they couldn't surpass Iara, they would eliminate her. The plan was simple, brutally simple. The brothers would invite Iara on a hunt at night, deep in the forest, far from the village. And there, when she was alone with them, they would kill her. They chose their moment carefully. It was during a new moon, when the jungle was at its darkest, when the spirits were said to be restless and dangerous, when people stayed close to their fires and avoided the deep forest. Perfect conditions for murder. The brothers approached Iara with false smiles and false brotherhood. They told her they'd found signs of a large animal, possibly a tapir or even a jaguar, in a remote area. But it would take all of them working together to bring it down. Iara, who trusted her brothers despite the distance that had grown between them, agreed immediately. This was a chance to reconnect, to hunt as a family. She saw it as an olive branch. It was a trap. They set out as the sun was setting. The 4 of them, armed with spears and bows, moving through the jungle as night descended. Iara led the way, as she always did, reading the forest, tracking the phantom prey her brothers had invented. They went deeper and deeper, far beyond the normal hunting grounds, so far that even if someone screamed, no one would hear. And then, at a signal known only to them, the brothers struck. Iara's combat instinct saved her from the first blow. She sensed the movement behind her, turned, caught the spear thrust meant for her back on her own weapon. Her training took over instantly. But there were too many, 1 against 3 or 4, in the dark, ambushed by people she loved and trusted. The fight was brutal. Iara was everything her legend said she was. Even caught by surprise, even outnumbered, she fought like a demon. She wounded 2 of her brothers seriously. She nearly broke free, but numbers and treachery won. They overwhelmed her, drove spears into her body, held her down as her blood soaked into the forest floor, and they watched as the life left her eyes. Iara, the greatest warrior the tribe had ever known, was dead, killed not by a worthy enemy in honorable combat, but by her own brothers, in the dark, in secret, like a common murder. And then came the cover-up. The brothers couldn't bring her body back. That would raise too many questions. Her wounds would show she'd been attacked from behind, that she'd fought multiple opponents. The truth would be obvious. So they carried her body through the jungle to the Rio Negro, the Black River, already mysterious and feared. And there, in the darkest part of the night, they threw her in. The current took her immediately. The black water swallowed her. Within seconds, she was gone, pulled down into the depths. The brothers stood on the bank, breathing hard, bleeding from the wounds she'd given them. They were alive. She was dead. Their plan had worked. They returned to the village with a story. Iara had been attacked by a jaguar. They fought it off, but not before it dragged her away. They'd searched, but couldn't find her body. The jungle had claimed her. The tribe mourned. The Paja mourned, but no one suspected the truth. The brothers thought they'd gotten away with it. They were wrong. The Paja was many things. A spiritual leader, a healer, a wise man, but before all of that, he was a father, and fathers know their children. When his sons returned with their story of Iara's death, something didn't sit right with him. Their words were correct. Their grief seemed genuine, but there was something underneath, something false. The wounds they carried were strange, not the claw marks of a jaguar, but clean cuts, spear wounds, the kind you get fighting another human. And their story had inconsistencies, small ones, details that didn't quite align. Why had they gone hunting at night during a new moon? Why so far from the village? Why hadn't they brought back Iara's weapons, which she would never have abandoned? But the Padja said nothing, not yet. Instead, he did what any good investigator does. He watched, he listened, he waited for his sons to make a mistake, and he consulted the spirits. The role of a Padja in Tupi-Guarani culture was complex. They were shamans, yes, but also psychologists, historians, and judges. They mediated between the physical and spiritual worlds. They interpreted dreams and omens. They held the collective wisdom of generations. The Padja performed ceremonies, drank ayahuasca, the sacred vine that opens the doors of perception. And in his visions, he saw the truth. He saw his daughter, betrayed by her own blood. He saw the ambush. He saw the murder. And he saw something else. Something the spirits were planning, justice. Meanwhile, strange things began happening in the village. The brothers, who should have been relieved, were plagued by nightmares. Every night, they dreamed of Iara. Sometimes she was alive, asking them why they'd hurt her. Sometimes she was dead, her body bloated and pale, rising from the river to point at them with waterlogged fingers. They woke up screaming, covered in cold sweat, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. Other tribe members began reporting strange occurrences near the river. They heard splashing at night when no one should be in the water. They found offerings left at the riverside disturbed, as if something had examined them. Some swore they heard singing, though no one in the village was singing. The Padja observed all of this, and he understood. Iara's spirit was not at rest. The river had not accepted her body as it should have. Something was happening. The natural order had been violated by her murder, and the cosmos was responding. But the Padja needed proof. Not spiritual proof, but physical evidence that would convince the tribe, that would allow him to act. And then, something extraordinary happened. 1 month after Iara's death, during the full moon, a fisherman named Tupa went to the river before dawn. He was an old man, one of the tribe's most experienced fishermen, who knew the Rio Negro like most people know their own homes. He cast his nets in the usual places, waited, and then began to pull them in. The nets were heavy, heavier than they should be. Tupa assumed he caught a large fish, perhaps a pirarucu. He pulled harder. What came out of the water was not a fish. It was Iara, but not as anyone had known her. Tupa screamed, dropped the nets, nearly capsized his canoe in his panic, because what he pulled up was impossible. Iara's body, which should have been decomposed after a month in the water, was pristine. More than pristine, it was transformed. From the waist up, she was still human, still recognizably Iara. Her face was peaceful, beautiful, somehow more beautiful than it had been in life. Her skin had a pale, luminescent quality like moonlight on water. But from the waist down, she was no longer human. Her legs had fused together, covered in scales that shimmered green and silver. A tail, like that of a massive fish, powerful and muscular. When it moved, the water around it churned. Tupa watched, frozen in terror and awe, as Iara's eyes opened. They were green now. Not the brown they'd been in life, but a deep, oceanic green that seemed to glow with their own light. And they looked directly at him. She smiled, opened her mouth, and began to sing. The song was unlike anything Tupa had ever heard. It was beautiful, achingly beautiful, but there was something wrong with it. Something that made his heart race and his mind cloud. He felt an overwhelming urge to dive into the water, to swim to her, to let her embrace him. He nearly did. But Tupa was old and wise. He lived through enough to recognize dark magic when he encountered it. With tremendous effort, he tore his gaze away from Iara's eyes, covered his ears, and paddled frantically back to shore. When he looked back, she was gone, vanished beneath the black water as if she'd never been there. Tupa ran to the village, burst into the Padja's home, babbling about what he'd seen. Iara was alive. No, not alive. Changed, transformed, half woman, half fish. And her song, her terrible, beautiful song. The Padja listened calmly and nodded, because this confirmed everything the spirits had shown him. Iara had been resurrected, but not by any force of good. The river itself, angered by the unjust murder, by the violation of throwing her body into its waters, had transformed her, given her a new form, a new purpose, vengeance. The Paja called a tribal council. He brought Tupa before the elders, had him repeat his story. And then, the Paja did something unprecedented. He accused his own sons of murder. The brothers denied it, of course, called their father mad with grief, said Tupa had been hallucinating, or had seen a manatee and mistaken it for something else in his fear. But the Paja was not finished. He revealed what the spirits had shown him. He pointed out the inconsistencies in his son's story. He displayed Iara's weapons, which he'd found hidden in the brothers' belongings. The weapons they claimed were lost with her body. And he issued a challenge. If the brothers were innocent, they would have no fear of going to the river at night, no fear of the place where Iara had been thrown. They would go there, call out to the spirits, and prove their innocence. It was a trap, and everyone knew it, but the brothers couldn't refuse without admitting their guilt. So they agreed. That night, the entire tribe gathered at the river bank. The brothers stood at the water's edge, pale and sweating despite the cool night air. The Paja chanted prayers and incantations, calling upon the spirits for truth. And then, from the river, came the sound, singing. The song started softly, almost imperceptibly, a humming that could have been mistaken for wind or the natural sounds of the river. But it grew and grew, until it filled the air, impossible to ignore. A woman's voice, singing in the old language, the sacred tongue that only the Paja and the eldest elders still fully understood. But everyone understood the emotion in that voice. Rage, sorrow, betrayal. And underneath it all, a terrible, patient hunger. The brothers tried to remain calm, tried to maintain their innocent facade. But as the song grew louder, as it wrapped around them like a living thing, their composure cracked. One of them started crying. Another began backing away from the water, shaking his head, muttering denials. The third fell to his knees, hands pressed over his ears, trying to block out the sound. And then, she appeared. Iara rose from the black water like a nightmare made flesh. In the firelight from the tribe's torches, her transformation was even more shocking than what Tupa had described. She was beautiful and terrible, alluring and horrifying. Her long black hair floated around her as if she were still underwater. Her skin glowed with that strange luminescence, and her tail, when it broke the surface, sent waves crashing against the bank. But it was her eyes that everyone focused on. Those impossible green eyes that seemed to see into their souls. She looked at the gathered tribe. Then her gaze settled on her brothers, and she spoke. Her voice, when not singing, was hollow. Echo why, as if it were coming from underwater even though she was at the surface. Brothers, she said, do you recognize me? The brothers said nothing, couldn't speak, frozen in terror. I forgave you so many things in life, Iara continued. Your jealousy, your resentment, your small cruelties. I loved you despite all of it. And how did you repay that love? Still, silence. You murdered me, Iara said, and though her voice remained quiet, everyone heard the fury in it. You looked me in the eyes and drove spears into my body. Your own sister, your own blood. One of the brothers broke, fell forward, weeping, beginning to confess. But Iara wasn't finished. The river found me, she said. The river that you thought would hide your crime. But the river was angry. Angry at the injustice, angry at the violation. So the river gave me a gift. She raised her arms. Her hands, which had once held spears and bows, now ended in fingers webbed and tipped with claws like a caiman's. I can never leave these waters now, Iara said, but I also can never die. I am bound to this place, to this form, for eternity. And do you know what my purpose is now, brothers? They shook their heads, still unable to speak. Iara smiled. It was not a kind smile. Revenge, not just against you, but against all men, because you taught me a lesson in my death. That man will destroy what they cannot possess. That man will kill what they cannot control. That man will betray even their own blood out of envy. She began sinking back into the water. So I will sing, she said, and men will come to me, and I will drown them, one by one, year after year, until the river runs red with them. This is my justice. This is my vengeance. And it will never end. She disappeared beneath the surface. The singing stopped, and in the silence that followed, one of the brothers bolted. He ran toward the jungle, trying to escape, but before anyone could stop him, he changed direction, ran straight into the river instead. The water closed over his head. He didn't resurface. The other brothers tried to run too, but the tribe's warriors seized them. They confessed everything. Every detail of the murder, the ambush, the cover-up. They begged for forgiveness. The Padja showed them none. The brothers' confessions confirmed what everyone had suspected, but it raised a more immediate question. What to do about Iara? She was no longer human. She was something else, something dangerous. And her vow to drown all men who came near the river was not an idle threat. She'd already claimed one of her own murderers. The Padja spent days in spiritual consultation. The elders debated. Some argued that Iara should be laid to rest somehow, freed from her cursed form. Others argued that her vengeance was just, that she should be left alone. But as the debate continued, Iara was already acting. Men from the village began reporting strange encounters. They'd go fishing and hear singing. They'd follow the sound, entranced, and only snap out of it when they were waist deep in the water. Moments from being pulled under. Some weren't so lucky. 3 men disappeared in 2 weeks, all last seen near the river. All found days later, drowned, their bodies bearing strange marks. Not the marks of crocodile or piranha, but of human hands. Hands that had grabbed them and pulled them down. A pattern emerged. Iara wasn't indiscriminate in her killing. She targeted specific types of men. Men who were cruel to their wives. Men who boasted and lied. Men who were lazy, who expected women to serve them. Men who, in her eyes, represented the same toxic masculinity that had led to her brother's betrayal. She was judging them and executing them. The tribe tried to adapt. They forbade anyone from going to the river alone. They posted guards. They performed protective rituals. Nothing worked. Iara's power grew. Her song could be heard from farther and farther away. Men from neighboring tribes began falling victim to her. And always, survivors reported the same thing. They'd heard singing. They'd seen a beautiful woman in the water. They'd felt an irresistible compulsion to join her. And then, darkness. The legends about Iara spread like wildfire through the Amazon. Tribes passed the story from village to village. Parents warned their sons. Shamans performed ceremonies to protect their people. But Iara's vengeance could not be stopped, because unlike her brothers, who had acted out of weakness and envy, Iara acted from a place of supernatural power. The river had chosen her. The waters obeyed her, and her mission was eternal. The question wasn't whether she would kill again. The question was, could anything stop her? To understand what Iara had become, the Padja needed to go deeper than he ever had before. He needed to commune not just with the spirits of the forest, but with the river itself. This was dangerous. The Rio Negro was one of the most spiritually significant rivers in indigenous cosmology. It was said to be a boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead, a place where reality was thinner, more permeable. The Padja prepared himself for weeks fasting, meditating, ingesting increasingly potent preparations of ayahuasca and other sacred plants. He was opening his mind to receive knowledge that most humans were never meant to access. And finally, on a night when lightning split the sky and rain hammered the jungle, the Padja entered a trance so deep that those attending him feared he would never wake. In his vision, the Padja found himself underwater, not drowning, but breathing, moving through the dark currents of the Rio Negro as if he belonged there. And there, in the deepest part of the river, he found Iara. But he also found something else. The river was not just water. It was alive. It was a consciousness ancient beyond measure that predated humanity itself. It had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. It had seen wars and peace, birth and death, countless millions of times. And it had been watching Iara. The river had seen her skill as a warrior, her strength, her courage, and it had also seen her murder, the ultimate injustice, the strong brought down by the weak through treachery rather than honest combat. The river was offended by this. In the natural world, the strong survive. That is the law. Iara's brothers had violated that law. They had used cunning and numbers to kill someone who, in fair combat, would have destroyed them. And so, when her body entered the water, the river made a decision. It would not let her die. Instead, the river transformed her, gave her a new body, one suited to its domain, made her part of itself, a guardian, an instrument of its will. But there was a price. Iara's humanity was gone. Her memories of her old life remained, yes, but the emotions attached to them had been changed, amplified, distorted. Her love for her people became irrelevant. Her sense of justice became twisted into a need for vengeance. Her warrior's instinct to protect became a predator's instinct to kill. She was no longer Iara the woman. She was Iara, the force of nature. The Paja understood now. This wasn't possession by an evil spirit. This wasn't a curse that could be broken. Iara had been fundamentally remade at a molecular, spiritual level. She was as much a part of the river now as the water itself. And like the river, she was eternal. When the Paja woke from his trance, 3 days had passed. He was weak, dehydrated, barely alive. But he had the knowledge he'd sought, and he understood that there was no way to save Iara. She was beyond saving. She was beyond human concepts of redemption or damnation. All that could be done was to learn to live with her, to respect her, to stay out of her way. While the Paja had been in his trance, the tribe had made decisions about the surviving brothers. They couldn't be allowed to remain in the village. Their crime was too great. They had murdered one of their own, the daughter of the Paja, the tribe's greatest warrior. They had lied about it, and they had brought a supernatural curse down upon the entire tribe. The punishment would be severe, but there was debate about what form it should take. Some argued for execution, a clean death, a final justice. Others argued for permanent exile, sending them into the jungle to fend for themselves, where they would likely die anyway, but would at least have a chance. The Paja, when he recovered enough to speak, had a different idea. Let them go to the river, he said. The elders stared at him in shock. That's a death sentence, one protested. Iara will kill them. Perhaps, the Paja said, or perhaps she will show mercy. It is not our place to decide anymore. They killed her. Let her decide their fate. It was a risky judgment. If Iara killed the brothers immediately, it would satisfy justice but leave the supernatural threat unresolved. If she spared them, what did that mean? But the tribe agreed. The brothers' fate would be left to their victim. The condemned men were brought to the riverbank at dawn. They were not restrained, but they made no attempt to escape. They knew there was nowhere to run. Their guilt had eaten away at them. The nightmares had destroyed their minds. They were shells of the men they'd once been. The Paja spoke to the river, to Iara, wherever she was in its depths. Daughter, he called out, these men murdered you. They have confessed. They have been condemned by the tribe, but the final judgment is yours. Do with them as you will. For a long moment, nothing happened. The river flowed. Birds called in the jungle. The tribe waited, and then Iara appeared. She rose from the water slowly this time. No dramatic emergence. She simply surfaced, floating there, her tail keeping her upright, her green eyes studying the brothers on the shore. They fell to their knees. One of them found his voice. Sister, he said, weeping, we are sorry. We were weak. We were jealous. We destroyed the person we should have protected. We know there is no forgiveness for what we did. We only ask, make it quick. Iara listened. Her expression was unreadable. The inhuman features of her transformation made it impossible to tell what she was thinking or feeling. You want mercy, she finally said. You want a quick death. You want your suffering to end. The brother nodded, still weeping. But I died slowly, Iara said, bleeding in the jungle, betrayed by those I loved, aware that my own brothers had murdered me. My death was not quick. It was agony. It was terror. It was the worst pain a human can know, the pain of betrayal. She moved closer to the shore. The tribe tensed, expecting violence. And then I awoke to this, Iara continued, gesturing to her transformed body. Trapped, neither alive nor dead. Unable to join the ancestors. Unable to rest. Bound to these waters forever, driven by rage I cannot escape. So no, she said, I will not give you a quick death. But instead of attacking, she did something unexpected. She sang, not the hypnotic song that drew men to their deaths. This was different, slower, sadder, a lament. As she sang, something happened to the brothers. They clutched their heads, screaming. But they weren't being physically harmed. Something else was happening. The Paja, with his spiritual sight, could see it. Iara was showing them something. She was making them experience what she'd experienced. The fear, the betrayal, the pain, the transformation. She was making them understand. When the song ended, the brothers collapsed. They were alive, but broken. When they looked up, their eyes weren't empty. They had seen something that no human mind was meant to process. Go, Iara told them. Live with what you've done. Live with what you made me become. And know that every day you draw breath is another day I spend in this prison you created. It was a more terrible punishment than death could ever be. The brothers were exiled that day, cast out from the tribe with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They wandered into the jungle and were never seen again. Some say they died within days, unable to survive without the support of the tribe. Others say they lived for years, mad and broken, haunting the deeper jungle like ghosts. A few claim they eventually threw themselves into the river, seeking the death Iara had denied them. The truth is lost to time, but their story became a warning. This is what happens when envy drives you to murder. This is what happens when you betray your own blood. This is the price of jealousy. The tribe itself went through a period of mourning and transformation. They had lost their greatest warrior. They had discovered that some of their own were capable of terrible evil, and they now had to live with a supernatural entity haunting their primary water source. Life became harder. Men were afraid to fish alone. Women took on more of the water-gathering duties, as Iara seemed less interested in harming them. The tribe developed elaborate rituals and protocols for safely approaching the river, and they never forgot what had happened. The story of Iara became central to their oral tradition, a cautionary tale passed from generation to generation. But something interesting happened as the story spread beyond the original tribe. It began to change. Distant tribes, who hadn't witnessed the events firsthand, focused less on the murder and betrayal. Instead, they emphasized the danger of Iara herself, the beautiful woman in the river who lured men to their deaths. She became a monster in these retellings, a seductress, an evil spirit that hated all men simply because they were men. The complexity of her story, the tragedy of it, was lost. She was simplified into a cautionary tale about sexual temptation and the dangers of women's beauty. It's a pattern we see throughout history. A powerful woman is reduced to a dangerous seductress. A victim of violence becomes the villain. The real perpetrators, the brothers who committed murder, fade into the background of the story. But the pageant made sure the true version was preserved. He taught it to his successors, made them swear to pass it down unchanged, because he understood something important. If people forgot why Iara became what she was, they would fail to learn the real lesson. And the cycle of violence, of envy, of men destroying women they cannot control, would continue. As decades passed, then centuries, the legend of Iara spread far beyond the original tribe. It became one of the most widely known stories in Brazilian indigenous culture. But it also evolved. Different regions added their own details. Different tribes interpreted the story through their own cultural lenses. In some versions, Iara became a protector of the rivers, punishing only those who polluted or disrespected the water. In others, she became purely malevolent, killing any man who came near regardless of his character. Some stories said she could leave the water during full moons, walking on land with human legs, searching for victims. Others said she could transform into a pink river dolphin, the legendary Bodo, and seduce women as well as men. The historical truth became buried under layers of myth and embellishment, but certain elements remained consistent across all versions. Iara was once human. She was transformed by betrayal and violence. She lives in the water. She sings, and she is dangerous. When European colonizers arrived in Brazil, they encountered the Iara legend and immediately connected it to their own mythology. They called her a mermaid, a siren. They drew parallels to Greek myths and European folklore. This further distorted the story. Mermaids in European tradition were often portrayed as vain, shallow creatures. Dangerous, yes, but in a frivolous way. They represented temptation and sin, but Iara was never frivolous. She was a warrior, a victim, a force of nature seeking justice. The colonizers missed the point entirely, or perhaps they understood it too well and chose to reframe it, because the real story of Iara is about indigenous strength, about a woman who exceeded all expectations, and about how that excellence led to her destruction by insecure men. That's not a story colonizers wanted to preserve. But despite their attempts to reshape it, the core of Iara's legend survived. Indigenous communities continued to tell the true version, and as Brazil developed, as cities grew along the Amazon and the Rio Negro, modern Brazilians encountered the legend anew. Today, Iara is one of the most recognizable figures in Brazilian folklore. She appears in books, movies, songs, and art. Children learn her story in school. But how many of them know the truth? How many understand that behind the fantasy, there might have been a real woman, a real murder, a real injustice that resonates even today? That's what we're here to uncover, to look past the myth and see the crime, to understand that Iara's story is not just folklore. It's a case that was never truly solved because the victim never received justice, only vengeance. And there's a difference. There was no trial in the Western sense. No courtroom, no jury of 12, no rules of evidence and procedure. But there was judgment. In indigenous justice systems, particularly among the Tupi-Guarani, the concept of justice was different from what colonizers would later impose. Justice was not just about punishing wrongdoers. It was about restoring balance to the community and to the natural world. The brothers' crime had created an imbalance. They had killed without honor. They had lied about it. They had violated sacred bonds of family and tribe, and the universe had responded by creating Iara's transformation. That transformation was itself a form of cosmic judgment, but the tribe still had to respond in their own way. The elders gathered for what anthropologists might call a restorative justice council. But it was more than that. It was a spiritual reckoning. Each member of the tribe who had been affected by the crime was given a chance to speak, to share how Iara's death had impacted them, how the brothers' betrayal had shaken their sense of safety and trust. Warriors spoke about losing their leader and inspiration. Children spoke about losing their hero. Women spoke about how Iara had represented possibility and how her murder felt like a message that excellence would be punished. The Paja spoke last, and his words were devastating. He talked about watching his daughter grow from a child to a warrior, about his pride in her accomplishments, about the pain of losing her and the worst pain of discovering that his own sons were responsible. He talked about the impossible position they had put him in. As a father, he loved all his children, but as the Paja, he had to serve justice, and justice demanded consequences. "My sons killed my daughter," he said. "In doing so, they killed part of me, but they also killed part of our tribe, part of our future. Iara would have led us to greatness, would have trained the next generation of warriors, would have ensured our survival. Instead, she is gone, transformed into something that cannot return to us, and we are left weaker, more vulnerable, more afraid. This is not just a crime against one person. It is a crime against all of us, against the natural order, against the spirits themselves." The brothers, present and bound during this council, said little. What could they say? Their guilt was absolute. Their shame was total. When it came time for them to speak in their own defense, one of them tried. "We were weak," he said. "We allowed envy to poison us. We made a choice we could never unmake. We destroyed the person we should have protected. If we could trade our lives for hers, we would." But the Paja shook his head. "That is not how the universe works. You cannot undo what was done. Iara cannot be returned to us. The balance cannot be restored by your deaths alone." This was a key point. In the indigenous worldview, justice was not equivalent to revenge. Killing the brothers would not bring Iara back, would not undo the transformation, would not heal the community. What was needed was acknowledgement, consequences, and a path forward. The council deliberated for 3 days. During that time, spiritual ceremonies were performed. The ancestors were consulted. Dreams were interpreted. Signs were read. And finally, judgment was pronounced. The brothers would be exiled, as we discussed before. But more than that, their names would be struck from the tribe's oral history. They would become non-persons erased, remembered only as the brothers who killed Iara, never as individuals in their own right. This was considered one of the worst punishments possible. In a culture where identity and legacy were everything, to be forgotten was to be truly destroyed. But the judgment went further. The tribe would adopt new laws. Any murder motivated by envy would carry the severest consequences. Any harm done to those who excelled would be treated as a crime against the entire community. And Iara herself would be honored. Despite her transformation, despite the danger she now represented, she would be remembered as a hero. Songs would be sung about her life, not just her death. Children would learn her story as an inspiration. In this way, the tribe attempted to extract meaning from tragedy, to ensure that Iara's legacy was not just as a victim or a monster, but as what she truly was, the greatest warrior they had ever known. This was their trial, their judgment, their attempt at justice in a situation where true justice was impossible. The verdict for the brothers was clear: exile, erasure, and eternal shame. But what about Iara? What was the verdict for her? This is where the story becomes truly complex, because Iara was simultaneously victim, executioner, and prisoner. She was a victim of murder. That was indisputable. She was now an executioner, drowning men in the river. That too was indisputable. But she was also a prisoner, bound to the river, unable to move on to the afterlife, trapped in a form and a purpose that had been imposed upon her by forces beyond her control. In Western legal systems, we might call this temporary insanity or argue about diminished capacity, but those concepts don't quite fit. Iara was not insane. She was transformed, operating according to a different set of rules and drives. The tribe had to make a decision about how to relate to her going forward, and that decision was complicated by the fact that she was still, in some sense, one of them, the Page's daughter, a member of the tribe who had been wronged. Some argued that she should be opposed, that shamans should work to either free her spirit or bind her so she could no longer harm anyone. But others argued that she was now a force of nature, like the river itself. You don't oppose a river. You learn to live with it. You respect it. You stay cautious around it. The final decision was to do both. The tribe would attempt to honor Iara's memory and respect her transformed state, but they would also protect themselves. They established rituals for safely approaching the water. They created songs and prayers that were said to keep Iara calm. They made offerings to her, treating her almost like a deity, and they taught their children, respect the river, respect Iara, do not go into the water carelessly, and never, ever act out of envy or malice toward those more gifted than yourself. This was the verdict. Iara would not be destroyed or saved. She would be acknowledged, respected, feared, and remembered. It was a verdict without end, because Iara, according to the legend, is still there, still in the Rio Negro, still singing, still waiting. Fishermen in the Amazon, even today, claim to hear her. Some say they've seen her, though of course such reports are dismissed as superstition or misidentification of river dolphins or manatees. But the indigenous communities know better. They know the story. They know the truth that lies beneath the legend. And they know that some crimes create consequences that last forever. Let's talk about what was really lost when Iara was murdered. On the surface, a tribe lost its greatest warrior. That's significant. In the context of pre-colonial Amazonian life, warriors were essential for survival. They defended against rival tribes. They hunted dangerous game. They ensured the safety of everyone. Losing Iara was like losing an entire military division. The tribe was measurably weaker without her. But the loss went deeper than that. Iara represented possibility. In a world with rigid gender roles, she had transcended those limitations. She proved that women could be warriors, that they could be leaders, that excellence had no gender. Her existence challenged assumptions and expanded what people believed was possible. Young girls who would have accepted traditional roles looked at Iara and thought, maybe I could be more. When she died, that possibility died with her, or at least, it was severely damaged. Because the message of her murder was clear: if you excel too much, if you outshine men, you will be destroyed. That's a message that still resonates today. How many brilliant women have been held back, attacked, or destroyed by insecure men who felt threatened by their competence? Iara's story is ancient, but the pattern is timeless. The tribe also lost her future contributions. She would have trained the next generation of warriors, would have shared her knowledge and skills, would have possibly become a leader, maybe even the next Page. She would have had children of her own, a family. Her bloodline would have continued, potentially producing more exceptional individuals. All of that was stolen by envy, by violence, by men who couldn't handle being surpassed by a woman. And the broader impact? The legend of Iara has shaped Brazilian culture for centuries. She appears in art, literature, music. She's a national symbol. But imagine if the real Iara had lived. If her techniques and philosophies had been preserved and passed down. If her example had inspired generations of indigenous women to take up arms and leadership roles. How might the history of Brazil be different? How might the indigenous peoples have fared better against colonization if they had maintained Iara's warrior tradition? We can never know, because her brothers, in one moment of jealous rage, erased that entire timeline. This is what murder does. It doesn't just end one life. It ends all the possibilities that life contained. All the people that person would have touched. All the knowledge they would have shared. All the children they would have raised. Iara was 20-something when she died. She might have lived another 40 or 50 years. Decades of leadership, teaching, and impact stolen by men who couldn't stand to see her shine. That's the real crime. Not just the murder itself, but the theft of everything she could have been. So what do we learn from Iara's story? On one level, it's a cautionary tale about envy, about how jealousy, left unchecked, can drive people to commit terrible acts, about how insecurity can poison relationships and destroy families. But it's also a story about systemic problems. Iara's brothers weren't just individually flawed, they were products of a culture that, despite allowing women warriors, still privileged male achievement. That still made men feel that their worth was tied to being the strongest, the best. When Iara surpassed them, it wasn't just a personal defeat, it was an existential crisis. And rather than examine their own internalized beliefs about masculinity and worth, they lashed out. Sound familiar? It should. Because we see this pattern constantly in modern society. Every time a woman is harassed online for being successful in a male-dominated field. Every time a brilliant student is bullied for making others feel dumb. Every time someone is attacked not for being bad, but for being too good. Iara's story is thousands of years old, but it's happening right now, today, all around the world. The legend also teaches us about consequences. The brothers thought they could commit murder and get away with it. They were wrong. Justice found them, if not immediately, then eventually. And their crime created ripples that extended far beyond their immediate punishment. It transformed their sister into something terrible. It traumatized their tribe. It created a legend that has lasted for centuries. One act of violence, one moment of weakness, and the consequences are eternal. But here's what strikes me most about Iara's story. She never got justice. Not really. Her brothers were punished, yes. But she didn't get her life back. She didn't get to rest. She didn't get peace. Instead, she got transformation into an instrument of vengeance. That's not justice. That's tragedy compounded by tragedy. Real justice would have been preventing the murder in the first place, recognizing the signs of dangerous envy and addressing them before they turned lethal, creating a culture where men didn't feel threatened by exceptional women. But that didn't happen, and it still doesn't happen nearly often enough today. So Iara remains in the river, still singing, still waiting, a symbol of justice denied and vengeance without end. The next time you hear about a woman being attacked for her success, remember Iara. Remember that this is an old story, a pattern that keeps repeating because we refuse to learn from it. And if you ever find yourself feeling envious of someone, if you feel that corrosive resentment building, remember what happened to Iara's brothers. Remember where that path leads. Because envy destroys. It destroys the person who feels it. It destroys their relationships. And if left unchecked, it destroys lives. Iara deserved better. She deserved to live her full life, to achieve everything she was capable of, to die peacefully among people who loved and honored her. Instead, she got betrayal, murder, and eternal imprisonment in a form she never chose. That's the real horror of her story. Not that she became a monster, but that she never had the choice to be anything else. This has been the story of Ia.warrior.victim. Legend, and a reminder that some crimes create consequences that ripple through time itself.